They left her at his door like something nobody wanted, and by sunrise, men would come looking for her. Before the wind even settled, Caleb Turner was already awake, sitting on the edge of his narrow bed, boots half-laced, listening to the kind of silence that only comes from 10 years of living alone. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, silence wasn't empty, it was warning. The boards of his cabin creaked once, soft, like something shifting its weight. Then came the knock. Not loud, not desperate, just certain. Caleb didn't reach for his rifle right away. A man learns, after enough years, that trouble doesn't always sound like trouble at first. He stood slowly, joints stiff from a lifetime of work, and crossed the room in 3 quiet steps. The lantern light flickered against the wooden walls, catching dust that hung in the air like it had nowhere else to go. Another knock. Same rhythm. Whoever stood outside wasn't afraid. That alone made him pause. He opened the door just enough to see. She stood there wrapped in a travel-worn coat, hem stained with dust from miles of bad road, one hand gripping the handle of a small leather case, like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. She didn't speak, didn't beg, just looked at him with eyes that had already decided something long before she arrived. Caleb studied her the way a man studies weather. Careful, distant, knowing it could turn without warning. "You lost?" he asked. His voice came out rough and used. She shook her head once. Slow, deliberate. Then she held out a folded paper, edges worn soft from being handled too many times. Caleb didn't take it immediately. The wind shifted behind her, carrying the faint scent of iron rails and smoke. Train tracks not too far off. That meant she hadn't been here long, or she hadn't planned to be. He took the paper at last, unfolding it under the lantern glow. A contract. Marriage by arrangement. Name of the groom. Cut clean out, like it had never belonged there. Caleb's jaw tightened just slightly. "He didn't show," she said. First words. Quiet. Steady. Not asking for sympathy. Just stating a fact. Caleb looked back at her. Noticed the way she stood, balanced, not leaning, not swaying from exhaustion like most would after a trip like that. Her boots were worn, but well kept. Hands steady. Eyes clear. This wasn't someone who had been waiting to be saved. This was someone who had already survived something. He glanced past her into the darkness. No horse. No wagon. Just empty land stretching out in every direction, the kind of place people disappear if they don't belong. "Nearest town's that way," he said, nodding west. She didn't turn. Didn't even look. "I know," she replied. The wind picked up again, brushing loose strands of her hair across her face. She didn't move to fix them. Caleb felt it then, that quiet shift in the air, like the moment before a storm decides to break or pass. He exhaled slowly, stepped back, and opened the door just a little wider. "One night," he said. "That's all." She nodded once, like that had always been the answer. As she stepped inside, Caleb noticed something small, barely visible beneath the fold of her sleeve. A faint mark pressed into the skin, the shape of a seal once worn too long. He didn't ask about it. Not yet. Outside, the wind carried on across the empty land. But somewhere far off, too far to hear unless you were listening for it, hooves were already moving. Caleb did not speak again once the door closed behind her, and for a moment the cabin seemed smaller, as if it had forgotten how to hold more than one soul at a time. The woman stepped in without hesitation, setting her leather case gently beside the wall like she had done it 100 times before in places that did not belong to her. She did not ask where to sit, did not ask what was allowed. She simply stood there, letting her eyes adjust to the dim lantern light, taking in every inch of the room with a quiet kind of awareness that made Caleb uneasy in a way he could not name. Most people looked at his cabin and saw nothing. She saw everything. The table worn smooth from years of use, the extra chair that had not been touched in a decade, the rifle resting within reach, but not in hand. Her gaze paused there for half a second, then moved on. "You can take the bed," Caleb said after a while, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I will manage out here." She shook her head once, the same steady motion as before. "I did not come to take anything from you," she replied. Her voice carried no weight of apology, only a quiet certainty that made the words land differently than he expected. Caleb studied her again, more closely this time. There was no tremble in her hands, no sign of fear clinging to her like dust from the road. Whatever had happened before she reached his door, it had not broken her. If anything, It had shaped her into something harder to read than most men he had known. He nodded toward the small stove in the corner. There is water if you need it. Coffee too, if you can tolerate it. She moved toward it without asking for permission, crouching slightly as she poured water into the kettle with careful, measured movements. Not rushed, not hesitant, just practiced. Caleb leaned back against the wall, arms crossed loosely, watching her the way a man watches a puzzle he has not decided to solve yet. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor between them. You travel alone? He asked after a stretch of silence that might have lasted seconds or minutes. Out here, time did not always behave the way it should. I do now, she answered. No explanation. No story offered. Just truth, trimmed down to its bones. Caleb almost let it go, almost decided that was enough. But something about her presence pressed against the quiet he had built for himself, like a door left slightly open in a house meant to stay sealed. That contract, he said, nodding toward the folded paper still resting on the table. You came all this way for a name that is not even there anymore. She glanced at it briefly, then back to the kettle as steam began to rise. Names can be removed, she said softly. But intentions, those are harder to erase. Caleb frowned slightly, not at the words, but at the way she said them, like she had learned that lesson the long way. The kettle began to whistle low, and she lifted it before the sound could grow too sharp, pouring the water into 2 cups without asking if he wanted one. She handed him a cup, her fingers steady, her gaze meeting his just long enough to make it clear she was not guessing. She knew he would take it, and he did. Outside, the wind shifted again, brushing against the cabin walls with a low, restless sound. Caleb turned his head slightly toward the door, listening without meaning to. It was faint, distant, but there, somewhere beyond the reach of lantern light and dry earth, something was moving closer. He looked back at her. She was already watching him, like she had heard it too. Caleb did not like the way she listened. It was not just hearing. It was knowing. The kind that came before a question was asked, before a decision was made. He set the cup down on the table without drinking, the warmth of it still in his hands as he turned slightly toward the door again. The sound had not come closer yet, but it had not faded either. It lingered out there beyond the reach of sight, steady, patient. You expecting company? He asked, his voice quieter now, like speaking too loudly might invite whatever it was to arrive faster. She did not answer right away. Instead, she walked to the small window near the corner, brushing aside the thin curtain just enough to look out into the dark. There was nothing to see, just open land stretching out under a sky that held no promise of rest. After a moment, she let the curtain fall back into place. Not expecting, she said, but I knew they would follow. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, not yet, but the recognition of a path he had not meant to step onto. He had spent 10 years avoiding exactly this. Other people's trouble, other people's stories. And now it stood inside his cabin, holding a cup like it belonged there. How many? He asked. She turned back to him, her expression unchanged, calm in a way that did not match the words that followed. Enough. That was all she gave him. No number. No urgency. Just certainty. Caleb let out a slow breath through his nose, his gaze drifting briefly to the rifle by the wall before returning to her. You should have kept walking, he said, though the words carried less weight than they should have. She did not argue, did not defend herself. I could have, she said, but I chose not to. That answer stayed in the air between them, heavier than it sounded. Caleb studied her again, this time looking for something he might have missed. A crack in the calm, a sign that she was afraid. There was none. Instead, he noticed something else. The way her eyes moved, not restless, but aware. Measuring distance, counting exits. She was not waiting to be protected. She was deciding what to do next. You ever use one of these? He asked, nodding toward the rifle. It was not a challenge. Not quite. More like a test he had not planned to give. She glanced at it, then back at him, and for the first time, something faint shifted in her expression. Not hesitation. Recognition. Yes, she said simply. Caleb gave a small nod, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. Outside, the wind dropped suddenly, leaving behind a silence that felt different from before. Not empty. Watching. Caleb straightened slightly, his senses sharpening in a way they had not in years. Then, faint but clear, came the sound again. Hoofbeats. Slower now. Closer. Not rushing. Not hiding. Just approaching like they had all the time in the world. Caleb moved to the door, but did not open it. He stood there for a moment, listening, counting without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. More behind them. He turned his head just enough to look back at her. She had not moved from where she stood, her posture steady, her hands relaxed at her sides. Not reaching for anything. Not running. Just waiting. Those yours? He asked. She met his gaze without flinching. No, she said. But they believe I belong to them. The words settled into the room like dust, quiet and unavoidable. Caleb looked at the door again, then at the empty space around them. The life he had kept untouched for so long. It did not feel untouched anymore. It felt chosen. And that was worse. The first rider stopped just beyond the edge of the lantern light, where the darkness still held its ground, and the others fanned out behind him without a word, their horses settling into stillness like they had done this before, like this was not their first door, not their first man standing behind it. Caleb rested his hand against the wood, feeling the faint vibration of hooves shifting weight on dry earth, and for a moment he did nothing, just stood there listening to the quiet arrangement forming outside his home. Not chaos, not urgency, order. That was what made it worse. He opened the door slowly, not wide, just enough to step out onto the small porch, the lantern light spilling past him and brushing against the boots of the man in front. The rider did not move forward, did not reach for anything. He simply looked at Caleb with the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly why he was there. Evening, the man said, his voice level, carrying easily across the short distance between them. Caleb gave a slight nod, nothing more. You are a long way from town, he replied. The man allowed the corner of his mouth to shift, not quite a smile. So are you. The others remained behind him, shapes against the night. Their presence felt more than seen. Caleb's eyes moved over them briefly, counting again without thinking. More than 3. Less than 20. Enough. What do you want? Caleb asked. He did not raise his voice. He did not step back. The man on the horse tilted his head slightly, studying Caleb the same way Caleb had studied the woman inside. Measuring. Deciding. We are looking for someone, he said. A woman traveling alone. She would have come this way. Caleb did not turn his head, did not look back toward the door. Plenty of land this way, he answered. Hard to say where someone might end up. The man's gaze held steady. Not this one. A pause followed, not empty, but deliberate. The kind of silence that asks a question without speaking it. Caleb felt it settle between them, felt the weight of it pressing against the choice he had not fully made yet. Behind him, inside the cabin, there was no sound, no movement, just that same quiet presence waiting. She is under my roof, Caleb said finally. The words came out before he could shape them into something safer, something less final. The man did not react immediately. He let the words sit, like he was giving them time to become real. Then he nodded once. Then we will speak with her. Caleb's jaw tightened just slightly. You can speak from where you are, he said. The rider's eyes narrowed a fraction, not in anger, but in recognition. You misunderstand, he replied. We are not here to take anything that is not given. Caleb let out a slow breath, the night air cool against his face. And if it is not given? The man shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking softly, his posture still relaxed, still patient. Then we leave, he said. But we do not leave without asking. Caleb studied him for a long second, searching for something behind the words. A lie, a threat. There was neither. Just certainty, the kind that does not need to prove itself. Behind him, the door opened. Not fast, not hesitant, just enough to let her step out into the light beside him. She did not stand behind him, did not hide. She came forward until she was level with his shoulder, her gaze fixed on the man in front of them like she had been expecting this moment long before it arrived. The rider inclined his head slightly when he saw her, a gesture that held more weight than any raised voice could. Miss Boone, he said quietly, it is time to come home. Caleb did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the man, waiting for something to break, for the night to shift into something he understood. But it did not. It only grew stiller, like the land itself was listening for her answer. The night held its breath, and for the first time since she stepped onto his land, Caleb felt something he had not allowed himself in years, a question that did not have a simple answer. He kept his eyes forward, fixed on the man in the saddle, but he was aware of her beside him in a way that unsettled the steady rhythm he had built his life around. She did not move closer to him, did not step away. She simply stood there, equal distance from both choices, as if the ground beneath her feet belonged to neither side. Home, she repeated quietly, the word leaving her lips like something she had tested too many times before. The rider nodded once, patient, certain. Everything has been arranged, he said. Your place is waiting. Caleb shifted his weight slightly, the boards beneath his boots creaking in the silence. He did not like the sound of that word. Place. It sounded like something decided without asking. She is not asking about arrangements, Caleb said, his voice low but firm. She is asking what you mean. The rider's gaze flickered toward him for a brief moment, then returned to her. You know what I mean, he said. She did not answer right away. Instead, she looked out past the men, past the horses, into the dark stretch of land beyond them, as if measuring something only she could see. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but there was something beneath it now. Not fear, not anger, something quieter. I know what was promised, she said. That is not the same as what is right. The words settled over the group like dust, soft but impossible to ignore. One of the men behind the rider shifted slightly in his saddle, the faint jingle of metal breaking the stillness for half a second before fading again. The leader did not turn. He did not need to. What is right, he replied slowly, is often decided long before we arrive to question it. Caleb let out a small breath, his gaze narrowing just slightly. That sounds like something a man says when he does not want to hear the answer, he said. The rider's eyes returned to him, studying him more carefully now, as if recalculating something that had not been part of the plan. And you, the man said, sound like someone who has forgotten how the world works beyond his fence line. Caleb did not respond to that. He did not need to. The truth of it was already known to him, and to the land, and to the silence that had kept him company for a decade. But something about her standing there had shifted that truth into something less certain. She stepped forward then, just one step, enough to place herself fully between Caleb and the men. Not hiding, not shielding, just choosing where she stood. If I come with you, she said, her voice steady, it will be because I decide to walk, not because you came to take me. The rider inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the words without agreeing to them. Of course, he said. We are here to escort, not to force. Caleb watched that exchange closely, hearing the gap between what was said and what was meant. He had lived long enough to know that some promises were built to hold, and others were built to sound like they would. She turned her head then, just enough to glance at Caleb, and in that brief moment, something passed between them that had not been there before. Not trust, not yet, but recognition, as if both of them understood that whatever choice came next, it would not leave things the way they were. The wind returned, brushing lightly across the open land, carrying with it the scent of distance and decision. She looked back at the rider, her posture unchanged, her voice quiet. Then you can wait, she said, because I have not decided. The man on the horse studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, measured nod. We will wait, he said. And for the first time that night, Caleb realized something he had not expected. They were not in a hurry, and that made the choice heavier than any demand ever could. Time moved differently after that. Not faster, not slower, just heavier, like each second had to push through something unseen before it could pass. Caleb stayed where he was on the porch, the lantern behind him casting his shadow long across the ground, reaching almost to the boots of the man in front. The riders did not shift. Their horses breathed quietly, steam rising faint in the cooling night air, but no one spoke. They were waiting exactly as promised. That was what unsettled him most. Not pressure, not force, just patience. Caleb turned his head slightly, his voice low enough that it did not carry far beyond the two of them. You trust them? He asked. She did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained forward, fixed somewhere past the riders, as if she was still measuring the distance between what was offered and what it would cost. I trust what they represent, she said finally. That is not the same thing. Caleb let out a faint breath, almost a humorless laugh. That sounds like a man I once knew, he said. He trusted what things stood for, too. Cost him more than he expected. She glanced at him then, just for a moment, studying the lines in his face like they told a story he had not spoken out loud. And did he regret it? She asked. Caleb did not look back at her. His gaze stayed forward, steady. He stopped asking that question, he said. The wind brushed past them again, softer this time, carrying the dry scent of open land and something else beneath it. Dust. Distance. The kind of smell that comes from places people leave behind. She drew in a slow breath, as if recognizing it. Then she stepped forward again, another small movement, enough to change the space between her and the riders. Caleb felt it without looking. That shift, that quiet decision forming shape. If I go with you, she said, her voice clear now, no hesitation left in it. I go as myself. Not as something arranged, not as something owed. The rider inclined his head once more, his patience unchanged. That has always been understood, he replied. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. He knew that tone, words that sounded like agreement, but did not promise anything beyond the moment. She seemed to hear it too, but she did not step back. Instead, she reached into the sleeve of her coat, slow enough that no one mistook the movement, and drew out something small. A ring. Plain. Gold worn smooth with time. She held it in her palm for a second, looking at it not with attachment, but with recognition. Then she extended her hand toward the rider. This was part of what was promised, she said. Take it back. The man did not reach for it right away. His eyes moved from the ring to her face, searching for something in her expression. Finding it. Or not. It was hard to tell. Finally, he extended his hand and took the ring carefully, as if it carried more weight than it appeared to. He turned it once between his fingers, then slipped it into his coat without comment. The exchange was quiet. Almost nothing. But something shifted in the air the moment it was done. Caleb felt it. The riders felt it. Even the horses seemed to settle differently, as if a line had been drawn and erased at the same time. She lowered her hand, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady. Now, she said, you can ask again. The rider studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Will you come with us? He asked. No pressure, no demand, just the question. The same question, but now it was different. Now it was hers to answer. Caleb did not move, did not speak. He stood there, watching a choice take shape that had nothing to do with him, and yet felt like it would leave a mark all the same. She did not answer right away. Instead, she turned her head slowly, looking at the land behind her, at the small cabin, at the man who had opened his door without knowing what would follow. And in that pause, longer than any before it, the night seemed to wait with her. She did not answer right away, and in that silence something shifted that no one could name, but everyone could feel. Caleb watched her as she turned fully toward the cabin, toward the worn steps, the door still open behind him, the lantern casting a soft, steady glow that made the place look warmer than it had any right to be. 10 years of dust, of quiet, of keeping the world out, and yet tonight, it looked like something a person might choose. Not for shelter, but for peace. She took one slow step back toward it, her boots pressing lightly into the dirt as if testing whether the ground would hold her decision. The riders did not move. The man in front remained still in his saddle, his patience unbroken, his gaze fixed on her with the same quiet certainty. Caleb felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something far less familiar. Expectation. The kind he had trained himself not to carry. You said you chose not to keep walking, he said, his voice low, not a question, not quite a statement. She stopped halfway between the two paths, her back to the riders now, her face turned toward him. The lantern light caught her features differently here, softer, but no less certain. I did, she said, and I am choosing again. Caleb held her gaze, searching for something he could understand, something that fit the world he knew. But there was nothing simple in what stood before him, only a decision that did not belong to him, and yet would change what remained of his life all the same. She looked past him then, into the cabin, her eyes tracing the outline of the table, the chair, the small stove where the kettle still rested, steam long gone, but warmth lingering in the metal. You live like the world ended 10 years ago, she said quietly. Caleb did not flinch. It did, he replied. She nodded once, like she had expected that answer. Then she stepped forward again, closing the distance between them, not as a guest, not as someone asking for permission, but as someone who had already decided where she stood. Then maybe it is time it started again, she said. The words landed softly, but they carried further than anything spoken that night. Caleb felt them settle somewhere deep, somewhere he had not let anything reach in a long time. He did not respond. Could not. Because for the first time, he did not know what to say. Behind them, the rider shifted slightly in his saddle, the faint sound of leather marking the first movement from that side since the waiting began. "Miss Boone," he called, his voice still calm, still controlled. "We cannot wait forever." She did not turn around. Not immediately. She let the words pass, let them hang in the air without catching them. Then she spoke, her voice steady, clear, and final. "You will not have to," she said. Only then did she turn back toward them, her posture unchanged, her eyes level with the man who had come to take her back. The distance between them had not changed, but something else had. Something invisible, but undeniable. "I will not be going with you," she said. No anger, no hesitation, just truth. The words settled over the riders like a line drawn in the dirt. The man in front studied her for a long moment, longer than before, as if weighing not just her answer, but everything that had led to it. Caleb stood still, the night air cool against his skin, the sound of his own breathing louder than it should have been. He did not look at her, did not move closer. He knew better than that. Some choices, once spoken, needed space to stand on their own. The rider finally inclined his head, a slow, measured acknowledgement that carried more weight than any argument could have. "Then you have made your decision," he said. She nodded once. "I have." The wind returned, soft and steady, moving across the open land as if nothing had changed. But Caleb knew better. Everything had. The words did not echo, but they settled in a way that made the night feel different, like something had shifted beneath the surface of things that could not be undone. The rider held her gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable, not anger, not disappointment, just calculation giving way to acceptance. Then, he gave a small nod, slower than before, as if this acknowledgement carried more weight than the others. "Then our part here is finished," he said. No threat followed, no argument, just the quiet closing of a path that had once been certain. Behind him, the other riders stirred for the first time, subtle movements, reins adjusted, horses shifting their stance as if they had been waiting for a signal that had finally come. Caleb remained where he was, still as the porch beneath his boots, watching the moment stretch and settle. He had expected something else. Resistance. Persuasion. But there was none. Only a kind of respect that did not need to raise its voice. The man in front reached into his coat and drew out something small, the same hand that had taken the ring now offering something in return. A folded paper. He leaned forward slightly in the saddle and extended it toward her. "This was meant for you," he said. She stepped forward just enough to take it, her fingers brushing the edge without hesitation. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the lines in the lantern light. Caleb watched her face, not the paper, waiting for something to change. It did not. Only a faint stillness settled deeper into her expression, like a truth she had already known was now written in ink. She folded it again with care and held it for a moment before lowering her hand. "You should keep it," the rider said quietly. "It belongs to you." She looked at him, then back at the paper, then past him into the darkness where the rest of the world waited beyond this small piece of land. "It belonged to a version of me," she said. "That is not who I am anymore." The man studied her once more, then inclined his head again, accepting the answer without question. "Very well," he said. He reached forward and took the paper back, not with reluctance, but with the same measured calm he had shown since arriving. Without another word, he turned his horse slightly, the movement smooth, controlled, as if even leaving was done with intention. The others followed, one by one, their silhouettes shifting against the dark as they began to move away from the cabin, not hurried, not slow, just certain. The sound of hooves returned, steady and fading, carrying with it the weight of something that had almost happened but did not. Caleb watched them go until the night swallowed them completely, until the last faint sound disappeared into the open land beyond his reach. Only then did he let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. It had changed shape. He turned slightly, his eyes moving toward her at last. She was still standing where she had been, the lantern light soft against her face, her posture unchanged, but something about her presence felt settled, not like someone passing through, like someone who had arrived. Caleb glanced briefly at the open land, then back at the cabin, then at her again. "They will come back," he said, not as a warning, but as a simple truth. She shook her head once, the same steady motion as before. "No," she said. "They will not." Caleb studied her for a long second, then gave a small nod, as if he believed her without needing to understand why. The wind moved through the land again, softer now, carrying no urgency, no distant rhythm of hooves. Just quiet. Caleb turned and stepped back into the cabin, leaving the door open behind him. He did not look back to see if she would follow. He did not need to. A moment later, he heard the sound of her boots crossing the threshold, steady, certain. Not asking, choosing. And for the first time in 10 years, the silence inside that small cabin did not feel empty. Morning came slow, like it was not sure it was welcome. The first lights stretched across the land in thin lines, catching on the edges of the fence posts, the roof of the cabin, the dust that never quite settled. Caleb was already awake, standing outside with a tin cup in his hand, watching the horizon the way he always did, like something might appear if he looked long enough. For 10 years, nothing ever had. Today felt different, though he could not have said why. Behind him, the door opened with a soft creak. He did not turn right away. He listened first. The sound of her steps was steady, unhurried, the same as the night before. Not a guest, not uncertain, just present. "You are up early," she said, her voice carrying easily. In the quiet morning air, Caleb nodded slightly, still looking out. "Habit," he replied. A pause settled between them, but it was not empty. It had weight now. Shape. She stepped beside him, not too close, not distant, her gaze following his toward the open land. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world felt wider in the morning, but also clearer, like decisions made in the dark had to stand in the light. "They will not return," she said again, softer this time, not to convince him, but to place the truth where it belonged. Caleb took a slow sip from his cup, the bitterness of the coffee grounding him in something familiar. "You seem certain about that," he said. She nodded once. "Because I was never what they came to collect," she replied. Caleb turned his head slightly, studying her for the first time in the daylight. Without the lantern glow, without the shadows, she looked different. Not softer, just clearer, like a story told without leaving anything out. "Then what were you?" he asked. She let the question sit for a moment, her eyes drifting down to the dirt beneath her boots, then back up to the horizon. "A decision someone else tried to make," she said. "And now?" Caleb asked. She glanced at him, a faint shift in her expression, not quite a smile, but close enough to change the air between them. "Now I make my own," she said. Caleb held her gaze for a second, then looked back out across the land, the same land he had watched for years without seeing anything new. Until now. He set the cup down on the fence post beside him, his hand resting there for a moment longer than necessary. "This place," he said slowly, "it is not much." She followed his gaze, taking in the worn wood, the dry ground, the distance that stretched in every direction. "It is enough," she said. Caleb nodded, a small movement, but it carried more weight than most things he had said in years. The wind moved through again, lighter now, carrying the scent of something different. Not distance, not departure, something quieter, something that stayed. He turned back toward the cabin, then paused, glancing at her once more. "There is work to be done," he said. Not an invitation, not a command, just a fact. She nodded already, stepping toward the door before he finished speaking. "Then we should not waste the morning," she replied. Caleb watched her for a moment as she moved inside, steady, certain, like she had already decided what came next. He looked back out across the land one last time, the horizon unchanged, the world still wide and indifferent as ever. But something in him had shifted, quiet and unspoken, like a door opened without a sound. He picked up the cup again, took one more sip, then followed her inside, leaving the morning light behind him. Out here, nothing had changed, and yet everything had.